Welcome to Hidden Ties, where every story hides a deeper truth. I had been sitting at that table for nearly an hour, holding back a storm of anger and disbelief. My parents, as if it was a casual afterthought, dropped a bombshell. They'd be using my inheritance to pay off my brother's debts. I sat there, staring, all while silently celebrating the fact that I had already moved everything, every last penny, into a trust fund they had no access to. They had no idea. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I had spent most of my life trying to be the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who always played by the rules. Maybe that's why it hit me so hard when my parents, with their predictable warmth and familiar comfort, casually said it in front of the whole family. My inheritance, the one that was supposed to be mine to manage, would go toward my brother's debts. I'm Nora, by the way. I'm 53, work as a freelance editor, and live alone in a small but cozy apartment in the city. My life is a little like a well-ordered book, everything in its place. I've been careful with my finances, building a small but comfortable nest egg over the years. Not much, but enough to give me some peace of mind in my later years. My brother, Michael, 3 years younger than me, always seemed to walk the easy path in life, until the debt collectors started calling and the bills piled up like dirty laundry. Growing up, we were always compared. Michael was the one with charm, always had a crowd of friends, always had his way with people. Me? I was the quieter one, more of a bookworm, less inclined to spend beyond my means. I remember one time at a family gathering when my mom said, "Nora's always been sensible. We're just worried about Michael, though. Too much of a free spirit, don't you think?" It stung. I never said anything, but I think that's when the resentment started to build. It wasn't about money. It was never about money. But I had worked hard for everything I had, and I had done it on my own. Michael, on the other hand, had always expected everything to come easy. And now this. They just tossed it out there. "Don't worry about it, Nora. We've decided we're going to use the inheritance to settle Michael's debts," my mom said, as casually as if we were discussing the weather. I could hear my dad's voice in the background agreeing with her, though his tone wasn't nearly as enthusiastic. I could see Michael sitting across the table, his shoulders slumped in a way that said everything. He was embarrassed, but he didn't protest. It was as if he was used to being the recipient of everyone's pity. But I didn't say anything. Not then. I just sat there, a smile plastered on my face, my fingers gripping the edges of my coffee cup so hard I thought it might crack. I had already planned for this moment. No one knew. I had transferred every single asset into a trust fund just 2 months earlier, after I found out about Michael's gambling problem. Every penny, everything I had worked for was untouchable to them. They had no idea. I wanted to tell them, to confront them, but I didn't. Not yet. The satisfaction of watching them stew, of letting them believe they had the upper hand, it was intoxicating. The next few weeks after that family meeting were filled with strange moments of quiet tension. My parents, blissfully unaware of the changes I had made, carried on as if nothing had happened. They called me regularly, asking how I was doing, telling me about their plans to settle Michael's finances once and for all. Each time, I felt a little more detached. I hadn't been close to Michael for years, but something about their casual assumption that I would just go along with it rubbed me the wrong way. Michael, for his part, seemed oddly distant, more than usual. He still lived with them, unable to make ends meet on his own. I'd tried to help him before, but it never worked out. The more I tried to fix his problems, the worse it seemed to get. Now, the fact that my inheritance, my hard-earned inheritance, was being promised to him, felt like the last straw. I wasn't a charity, and I wasn't his backup. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. The moment when my parents would realize that their carefully laid plans had gone sideways. Every conversation with them felt like a game now. I listened, I nodded, and I said all the right things. But inside, I was counting down the days until the reveal. They had no idea how thoroughly I had outplayed them. A week later, I decided it was time for a little test. My mom called me one afternoon, as usual, chatting about nothing in particular. She asked, "You know, Nora, have you been thinking about your inheritance? We were planning on paying off Michael's debts, but we really want to make sure it's the best move for you, too." She said "we," like it was a decision we were all making together, but of course, it was really about what they wanted. I didn't respond right away. I knew this was a test to see how I'd react. I let the silence stretch between us, watching the clock on the wall tick, my heart strangely steady. "Oh, I've thought about it," I said, my voice calm. I kept my tone neutral, not giving anything away. "But I think it's a good idea to let Michael handle his own problems. It's time for him to figure things out on his own." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to read between the lines. "Well, of course, but we thought it might be helpful for everyone. You know, to get him back on his feet." The urge to cut her off, to scream that I had already set everything up so they couldn't touch it, was overwhelming. But I held myself back. I wanted to savor this moment. "I'm sure it'll work out, Mom. You know I trust you and Dad," I said, letting the words hang heavy in the air. "I just think sometimes you've got to let people take responsibility for their own messes." I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out if I knew something she didn't. "Right, of course." She sounded a little less confident now, but still trying to maintain control. "Well, just let us know if you need anything, okay?" "I will," I said softly, hanging up without another word. I felt something stir in me then, a satisfaction I couldn't fully explain. I was no longer the daughter who followed the rules, the one who always did what was expected. Now, I was the one with the power. I had control. They had no idea just how much. I knew the moment was coming. I could feel it building, a quiet anticipation in the pit of my stomach. My parents were getting closer to realizing that they couldn't just take what they wanted, that my inheritance, which they thought would bail out Michael yet again, was beyond their reach. But what would they do when they found out? Would they be angry? Hurt? Would they see me as the villain in their story? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. I was tired of being the good daughter, the one who always went along with whatever they decided. This was my turn. It was a Wednesday when my father called. I had been expecting it, but hearing his voice still made my pulse quicken. "Nora," he said, his voice flat and serious. "We need to talk." I could hear the weight of something unspoken behind those words, like a storm on the horizon. I didn't reply immediately, letting him stew in his own silence for a moment. "About the inheritance," he continued, "your mother and I were discussing it, and we think it's best if we use it to pay off Michael's debts. It's the right thing to do, don't you think? You know how much he needs this, and it's not like you're in any immediate need of it yourself." That was the final push. My patience snapped, and I finally let my real feelings spill out, but I kept my voice calm, careful. It was time to make them see. "Dad," I said, my tone firm but controlled, "I've already taken care of it. I transferred everything into a trust fund. You can't touch it." There was a long pause. I could feel the shock ripple through the silence. I almost let myself smile, but I held back. I wasn't done yet. "You... what?" My father's voice was tight, unsure. "What do you mean you've taken care of it?" "I mean exactly what I said," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "It's no longer under my control. It's in a trust. A fund that you and Mom can't access. Not now, not ever." I heard a muffled sound on the other end, maybe my father exhaling or his hand hitting the table in frustration. "Nora, why would you do that? This is your family, your brother, your responsibility." "I'm not responsible for Michael's choices, Dad," I interrupted. "I tried to help him. I really did. But I'm not going to be the one to clean up his messes forever. He has to face the consequences of his own actions." There was another long pause, this one heavier, more uncomfortable. I could practically feel the tension seeping through the phone line. Finally, my father spoke, but his voice wasn't the calm, authoritative tone I was used to hearing. Instead, it was almost pleading. "Nora, this isn't about fairness. It's about family. You're punishing us all for Michael's mistakes. You're punishing him." "I'm not punishing anyone, Dad," I said, each word sharper than the last. "I'm protecting myself. I've worked my whole life to get where I am, and I won't let anyone take that from me." His voice wavered. "We're your parents. You can't just shut us out like this." "I'm not shutting you out," I replied, my breath steady despite the chaos churning inside me. "I'm just saying no. I'm saying enough is enough." I could hear him trying to gather his thoughts, struggling to find the words. "You'll regret this. We'll make sure you know how much you've hurt us." "Maybe," I said, finally letting myself take a breath. "But you're the ones who didn't even stop to ask what I wanted. You never even thought to include me in the conversation. This is my life, my choice, and I'm done being the invisible one." I ended the call before he could respond, the weight of the decision settling heavily in my chest. The conversation hadn't gone how I expected. In some ways, it had been easier than I thought. In other ways, it had been harder. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. My parents, my brother, the expectations, they had all weighed on me for years. And now, for the first time, I had control. But I wasn't finished yet. After that conversation, things between me and my parents took on a new dynamic. For the first time, they treated me differently. There was an unspoken tension hanging in the air, one that I could feel every time we spoke or saw each other. It was as if the balance had shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just the daughter they could rely on without question. I was the one who had pulled the rug out from under them. For the next few days, my mother called less often, and when she did, the conversations were brief, lacking the usual warmth. Dad seemed distant too, not calling me as frequently for our usual chats about trivial things. But the worst part was Michael. He had been avoiding me entirely. I didn't want to believe that he had taken my parents' side, but the silence between us said everything. The once constant presence of his phone calls and texts had evaporated. Instead, I got a few short, cold responses. "I know you're upset," one text read, "but this isn't the way to fix things. You'll see." It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. The years of feeling like I was never good enough for Michael, the years of seeing him as the golden child while I worked tirelessly to make my life something solid and unshakable, it all felt like it was coming to a head. The inheritance, the trust fund, it was just a symbol, really. What I really wanted was respect, acknowledgement. For once, I wanted to be more than the dutiful, quiet sister. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't a backup plan, that I had a life and boundaries that meant something. But as days passed, I began to feel the weight of it all. The isolation was starting to sting. What if this didn't fix things? What if this only pushed them further away? The doubts crept in late at night, when I was alone with my thoughts. I wasn't used to making waves. I wasn't used to standing up for myself in such a bold, uncompromising way. But there was something else brewing beneath that uncertainty. It wasn't just the family dynamic that was shifting, it was me. I was learning to live for myself, to make choices that were right for me without worrying about how it affected everyone else. And then the bombshell came. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I got the call. It was from my lawyer. I had set everything up so carefully, but even with all the precautions, I had a feeling this wasn't going to be simple. "Ms. Rayner?" The lawyer's voice was calm but firm. "We've encountered an issue regarding your trust fund. Your brother is attempting to contest the validity of the trust. He's hired a lawyer." My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected Michael to take this route. I thought he'd back off, at least for a while, but I should have known better. Michael had always found a way to manipulate situations, to twist them into his favor. And now, he was doing it again. "He's claiming that you transferred everything behind your parents' backs, that you did it out of malice with the intention of harming him," the lawyer continued. "This is going to get messy. We'll need to prepare for a legal battle." I sat down heavily in the chair, trying to steady myself. This was it. The storm I'd been avoiding was finally here, I should have seen it coming. Michael had always seen himself as the victim, and now he was playing the part with everything he had. But there was no going back now. I had already made my decision. The trust was ironclad. Michael could try, but he wouldn't succeed. I wasn't backing down, not this time. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "Do what you need to do. I'm not going to let him get away with this." As I hung up the phone, I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is mine, this is my life, and I won't let anyone take it from me." The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, phone calls, and increasingly tense family interactions. Every conversation with my parents felt like walking on eggshells, and Michael's efforts to contest the trust fund were relentless. But through it all, I held firm. The more he pushed, the more resolute I became. I was not about to let him, or anyone, make me feel small again. The legal battle was ugly, no question. Michael's lawyer tried every trick in the book. He argued that the trust was fraudulent, that I had taken advantage of my parents' trust. He even accused me of manipulating them, of using the inheritance as a way to punish Michael. It wasn't true, of course, but that didn't stop him from spinning the story like it was. I found myself in court more often than I wanted, sitting across from my brother, who, I realized, I barely recognized anymore. The person I grew up with was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to think the world owed him something, someone who believed the rules didn't apply to him. One evening, after yet another grueling legal meeting, I decided to visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in a while, and the silence between us had become unbearable. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, a truce maybe, or at least an acknowledgement that what had happened wasn't as simple as they had once believed. When I walked into their house, it felt like a ghost town. The familiar smells of my mother's cooking, the sound of the TV in the background, it was all there, but somehow it was different. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her, her expression a mix of sadness and frustration. "Mom," I said quietly, sitting across from her, "we need to talk." She looked at me, her eyes weary. "Nora, I don't know what to say. This whole situation with Michael, with the trust, it's tearing us apart. We never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," I said, my voice soft. "But you need to understand something. I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I did it because I had to protect myself. Michael, he doesn't take responsibility for anything, and I'm not going to let him use me to clean up his mess anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt a pang of guilt. I hated seeing her like this. "I never thought you'd go so far, Nora. I thought you'd help him. You're his sister. You're family." "I am family," I said, my voice steady now. "But that doesn't mean I owe him everything, and it doesn't mean I should give up everything I've worked for just because he can't control his own life." There was a long silence, and I could tell my words were hitting harder than I expected. My mom opened her mouth to say something, but stopped herself. Instead, she just shook her head and sighed, rubbing her temples. "Your father, he's upset too. He doesn't understand. He feels like we're losing both of you." "That's the problem, isn't it?" I replied. "I've spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, to do what was expected of me. But it's never been enough, has it? I've always been the responsible one, the one who could be relied on. And in the end, it was like I wasn't even seen, like nothing I did mattered." My mother's face softened, and she reached out to touch my hand. "Nora, please. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to tear us apart." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. "I know you didn't mean it, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. I'm not a backup mom. I'm not a safety net for everyone else's mistakes." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand," she whispered. I just didn't want to lose you." "You haven't lost me," I said softly, "but I can't keep losing myself either." We sat in silence for a while after that, neither of us knowing what to say next. There was so much hurt, so much left unsaid, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like the air between us had cleared. We weren't there yet, not by a long shot, but I could feel the possibility of reconciliation. A few days later, my lawyer called again with an update. Michael had dropped his case. The fight was over. But I didn't feel victorious. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing my ground, about finally putting my foot down and saying that I would no longer be the person everyone else expected me to be. I would be me, and I wouldn't apologize for it. The weeks that followed were quiet. Michael didn't speak to me much, but there were no more threats of lawsuits, no more attempts to manipulate my parents. Slowly, things began to shift. My parents, though still hurt, started to accept that I wasn't going to be the person they thought I was. I wasn't their perfect daughter. I was just me. And for the first time in my life, I was okay with that.